There are three things in life that are certain: paying taxes, dying, and knowing every year a new Call of Duty will be released. Black Ops 4 will soon be hitting store shelves, and soon after, prepubescent boys' hands, and I could not be less excited. I've lost a certain amount of interest in Call of Duty games the past few years. It wasn't always like this, though. There was a time when I counted down the days to the next COD. Annoying Instagram posts littered my feed. Hours of my life wasted to the Treyarch gods. Introductions of brand new cuss words.
Look at my channel! Suck your mom's dick!
COD is the butt of many a joke at this point in gaming, but there was a time when they had a pretty impressive stride of enjoyable games and sometimes downright badass ones. Then came the Dark Ages, a plague of subpar effort at games, raping and pillaging of villages, mass death. World War II was supposed to be the resurgence of old school Call of Duty. Back to boots on the ground gameplay. No more this EXO double jump penis pump bullshit. They promised the most realistic game possible. Let's be honest though, COD has never been too much about realism. It being a World War II set game, I was picking it up day one. I was so excited for this. We were going to be taken back to the roots of what made COD great. November 3rd came around. The game was released, and I'm pretty easy to please and find it hard to complain about games in general, but my fucking god. Sledgehammer had a mess on their hands. If you can't simply get screen to screen without error messages, you have major problems. Multiplayer was basically unplayable. I think it's safe to say it was a pretty terrible launch. Not only that, but the amount of content available was hideously scarce. There were only 9 multiplayer maps, not including the 3 war maps. The number of guns available was embarrassingly low, with less options than World at War from 10 years ago. It used to be a staple to spend long amounts of time putting together the perfect class. At this point, you could put together a class within minutes because of a lack of options. I wasn't too bothered by the inclusion of supply drops, as they were gained just by playing, but there was really no fun in opening them. I'm a sucker for a good COD campaign, and I feel like it's not much of the focus of the developers anymore. It was announced early on that they would distance themselves from showing any Nazi propaganda, at least in multiplayer. Compare this to World at War, which I will do a few times, and how unapologetically brutal they made that game. They weren't afraid of offending people, but showing how grim and animalistic war really was. The atmosphere was dreadful. You knew what you were in for from the impressive opening animation that included real-life footage. It was a game that taught about history, why we fought, where we fought, and sometimes how utterly unbelievable it was to fight. I mean, look at Wolfenstein. They portrayed a dementia-ridden Hitler shooting someone point blank in the face and no one bitched. Even if they did, any publicity is good publicity. Someone will always be offended. Most of the time it won't last long. You censor yourself, which alienates your fanbase just for a few months of not offending a demographic that won't play your games anyway. While I did enjoy the campaign, it was somewhat generic with 2x4 hollow characters. That means they were wooden. There are cheap equality elements that are forced.
Pleased to make your acquaintance.
Sorry, I didn't expect
To work alongside such a fine engineer.
QuickTime events were present but never annoyingly hurt the game. It was basically a greatest hits of important battles of the European front in World War II, which was cool. I would have liked to see a bit of the Pacific theater sprinkled in, or even from the Russian perspective. It felt like it was praising the United States and Germany as the only important countries involved. While it was violent, I feel like they never went there. Went there like World at War. I mean, holy fuck! They attempted to with the concentration camp sequence, but to me it was there almost as a, hey, we have the balls to look at the human atrocities. But it was glossed over and didn't portray it as much of an atrocity. They suppressed elements they thought would be too much for audiences. I do like the way they took out regenerative health and replaced it with health packs that you need to ask for from comrades. It adds more impactful decision making, as you can't go balls deep in a human kamikaze attack like before. The graphics were extremely impressive though, and was easily the best looking campaign in the series. There's some jaw-dropping scenery and downright photorealistic sequences. Most of my issue come with the multiplayer though. Not the 12-year-old talking about fucking my mom. That's relevant in any gaming scenario. My issue was with the maps and furthermore, the layout of them. The design of them is beyond lazy. If it's not a map with a simple 3-lane setup, then it's a reskin of an already existing map. Sometimes it's both. USS Texas is so much hijacked. Flak Guns is very similar to Raid. I mean, God, 2 of their maps are straight up remakes of old maps. There's no variety, there's no creativity, there's no multi-leveled vantage points, there's no openness, no interactive elements. This is the war-torn city of Stalingrad that's been miraculously cleaned up of debris. I'll give credit to Aachen though. It's pretty ravaged and looks like it's seen a battle, but for the most part, they're missing the chaos. Let's bring it back to World at War for a second. There's no rhyme or reason to these maps. You have a wide open long-range map, you have a 3-leveled map, you have a close quarter intense map. It was still guilty of the 3-lane system at times, but there was variety. There was a sense of chaos. There were quirks. Now you feel like a caged animal because you're cordoned off in these very small and specific areas with no unique passages to explore. There's no threat of getting lost and falling off the map because the restrictions are very clear. Why can't I shoot this down? All this complaining makes it sound like I hated the game, but I didn't. I had fun with it, but I wasn't satisfied. Obviously something was missing. A lot was missing. So the game came out in November. I played somewhat heavily into December until I purchased a Nintendo Switch. After I bought that, I was on the Switch bandwagon and did not look back. I didn't touch an Xbox game for 9 months, until one fateful day when they announced a classic. Modern Warfare 2 was now backwards compatible on Xbox One. I had to go back and play it. I spent so much time on that game. It was an essential gaming experience during a pivotal time in my life, during high school. Even in its over-the-top and massively hacked glory, it was one of my favorite CODs. Modern Warfare 2 was my gateway drug to get myself back into the Xbox. Once I played some of that, I decided, well, all of my faves are backwards compatible. Let's give them a try. World at War, couldn't find a game. Black Ops, couldn't find a game. Black Ops 2, whoa, couldn't find another mother flipping game, so I was left with one option. I expected to pop the disc in and play a few games. I just wanted to see the state of the game now. I was not prepared for what I was to discover. Oh man, I do really like that orchestra intro. It was completely transformed. More options, more game modes. I was glued. A few games turned into an entire weekend. While I liked Headquarters and the idea of it at the start, they were only just starting to work out the kinks and finally getting more people together on the beach. There was a time where I thought you were supposed to be all alone because that's how the game was at first. Now, the HQ is poppin'. It's a fun little place to go one-on-one, interact with friends, and find little secrets. There are fun social events that occur every so often, and even on holidays. Granted, I think the HQ was a way for them to make supply drops more public to subtly advertise their existence to those wanting grips and flamingo keychains. There were challenges and orders you could complete. At any rate, I enjoyed the HQ and its use in the game. Not only that, there are now tons more options for weapons, attachments, and melee items. There was a time when there were only 6 submachine guns and 1 melee item, among other shortages. New game modes have been added such as Dogfight, which is so much fun. You can do just that, compete in dogfights against other teams. It's pretty basic, and there are some ways they could improve it. One thing, a bigger map size would have been cool, and I would have liked for them to have some sort of game mode where you could escort some bombers while other players try to take them down. I was always a big fan of dogfighting games, and although there are only 2 maps, it's a serviceable addition. They added fan favorites such as Gun Game and Prop Hunt. I enjoy Gun Game, but I've been sinking a lot more time into Prop Hunt. It's a crazy fun and intense game of hide and seek that I'm really enjoying. I find myself laughing maniacally as I convince myself, oh, they'll never find me here, and proceed to kill me immediately. I can't help laughing as you find yourself chasing down a barrel or a pair of shoes as they try to slip away. A cutesy little mode they added was Sandbox, where you play as a toy soldier in a big sandbox of playing cards, sandcastles, and Lincoln Logs. It's fun for what it is, seeing the giant soldiers on Normandy Beach and carefully avoiding the burning rays of sun through a magnifying glass. Interestingly, a lot of these changes occurred around the time Sledgehammer Games head Michael Condrey was essentially promoted to another position at Activision in February. A lot of changes that helped the game. Not only the examples listed before, but a massive overhaul to the Division system. A lot of changes that help simplify and adjust it for the better. Now, I'm not exactly insinuating the quality of the game from before to now was solely the responsibility of he and Glenn Schofield, but it's intriguing to think about. Or maybe coincidental. Or maybe they had these plans for these changes all along. Or maybe not. Initially, there was also the introduction of the War Game mode. Not the War mode from World at War, but a new version. a narrative-driven mode. Narrative-driven is a stretch when it comes out to be just 3 objectives you need to complete with the opposing side attempting to defend against you. It's a good time, and it's a team-oriented sort of mode. But of course you have the fucking losers that only go for kills. I love being able to storm the beaches of Normandy like I'm Tom Hanks and work with my team to complete objectives different than the usual team deathmatch. Kill a bunch of people, or search and destroy, blow up a package. Of course, with any COD game you get 4 DLC map packs that include 3 multiplayer maps, a war mode map, and a zombies map. It adds more content and variety to the multiplayer, but not variety in a good sense. There are more maps, but they still follow the same format we discussed earlier, a 3-lane system. I'll admit, it's cool to fight on the beaches of Dunkirk, which is timely since a movie just came out about it. It's interesting to see the bunker that was used to attempt to assassinate Adolf Hitler on Valkyrie, and it's a nice historical touch to have the body of Reinhard Heydrich covered up after his assassination on the Anthropoid, even though that's not how it went. There's a lot of history in this game that I love simply because it's World War II set game. Basically what I'm saying is World War II has become a much better game that I will probably spend a lot more time with because it's a much more enjoyable experience now. Case closed, end of video, goodbye. The problem is, this isn't where it ends. This video started as just me talking about how COD has become a better game, and now I dig it. It eventually evolved into something else when I realized that this isn't the first time I've made a video talking about a game that was disliked at the beginning of its life and eventually got better. Hell, it's definitely not the first time that's happened in human existence. Therein lies the problem. Unfinished games. Is this where we're at in gaming when you pay a full price $60 for a game that is lacking in features, lacking in content, or simply dead on arrival? The question becomes, why does this happen? Well, I have a theory that is not grounded or backed up by any sort of evidence. I'm of the mindset that a company puts out a vanilla game basically as a blank slate to hear the outcry of the fans and what they wished was featured, pick and choose what the fans want in that game, and slowly add those features through updates and DLC. It brings back some players who are a bit more forgiving or curious of the updates, but you distance a portion of them who are left with a sour taste in their mouth after the initial release. Gamers that may never come back and play the game. Or is it something a little simpler and a little more sinister? Are they lazy and just looking for a quick payday? We've seen it a lot lately, not just with video games, but publisher interference can be an issue. We literally just discussed it like 2 minutes ago. It was a literary technique known as foreshadowing. Deadlines and studio heads thinking they know what makes a quality game rather than allowing the artist to develop their vision. The end goal is for the publisher to make money. If it isn't deemed profitable by those in charge, it's not gonna happen. Take for example a few years ago the situation at Konami where Hideo Kojima was reportedly fired and taken off his project of Metal Gear Solid 5. He was working indirectly with the rest of the team. The working conditions were poor, and this resulted in a less than satisfactory game to some because of several unresolved plot points, removed content, and reused sections due to, you guessed it, time constraints and publisher interference. Amazingly enough, the game was released to positive reviews and solid sales. It was hard as shit, but it wasn't a bad game. The unfortunate thing is that these issues don't plague a lot of these games financially because they were built up on a substantial amount of hype that led to decent sales. Let's look at No Man's Sky. Some said it was perhaps one of, if not the most hyped indie title in the history of gaming, especially with such a small studio taking on a game of this apparent magnitude. It was burdened with exceedingly high expectations, and once released, eventually changed the way games were promoted, because what was shown beforehand and what the game became was very different. And somehow, to everyone's surprise, the game was nowhere near as advertised. There was a narrative of do anything, and it just works.
And they can do whatever they want.
And it didn't. It came out to, I wouldn't say widespread negativity, but there was a massive disappointment that loomed over the game. But that hype helped it sell well, and Hello Games was not ready for it. They expected around 10,000 people would get the game, so when 500,000 people were playing, their servers and support team could not keep up. I will give credit to Hello Games in this scenario though. They took the heat, and they continued to try and improve the game. They released a massive update known as No Man's Sky Next that was said to be a better representation of the game they intended to release in 2016. So why did they rush the game 2 years in advance of the actual game they initially wanted to put out? I mean, what the fuck is this? Now they're just blatantly admitting it. Maybe I'm looking too much into something that should be expected. Games are not the same as they used to be. There was a time when once you put out a game, that was it. There was no way to update it, no DLC, no fixes. You have to believe that at the time developers were, in a manner of speaking, on top of their game, to make sure the game was as good as it could be. Now with the inclusion of internet updates, there's no urgency to make everything as good as possible before launch. And I have to concede that this is not always in the developer's full control. Bigger and more complex games will always have issues. You combine that with the inclusion of multiplayer and throwing a million people simultaneously into a game, and you will always find bugs that the developers just weren't able to. What is in their control is how efficient they are at fixing the issues and how well they communicate those issues to the fans. I can forgive a developer that tries to better their game after launch, but if you release a broken game just to cash in, you can fuck off. Delays are helpful. In the words of our Lord and Savior, a delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad. Good games have been delayed before. BioShock was delayed, so was Wind Waker. They are not always ideal, and they don't always fix a game, but at times it's necessary. Even as recently as Battlefield 5. Seemingly they did it to gain more feedback from the beta and leave them enough time for final adjustments. Not to mention it was sandwiched in between Call of Duty and Red Dead Redemption 2, another delayed game. For EA though, it caused their stock to dive. But this brings up the temporary lose situation that many developers find themselves in. You release an unfinished game on the release date and alienate a group that could have patiently waited for a completed experience, that may put down the game and never come back because they were disappointed with what they paid for initially, and are too butthurt stubborn to come back and try again while also compromising the quality of the game in general. Or you delay the game and temporarily disappoint a group of annoying fucknuggets who are never satisfied with anything that would complain no matter if the game was delayed or rushed or given free DLC forever or suck your dick. So what's a developer to do? Well, give up and stop making games, of course, because you can't satisfy everyone. Now, if I was a developer in a situation such as this, I would take the initial heat in exchange for what I hope would be a completed, fully fledged game that won't require a massive overhaul of updates. Let me put it this way. Would you rather be a sensual lover or a quick shooter? Think about that analogy for a second. A sensual lover will take their time and pleasure their significant other, so they are perfectly satisfied and will be forever known as someone of quality and care and sexual prowess. A quick shooter will blow their load too quickly and live with the shame and regret that they could have done better, but in time will slowly gain the trust back of their lover and have a chance to redeem themselves with multiple chances and several updates to their abilities to satisfy. This is a giant fucking stupid metaphor. Oh, this has all gotten way out of hand, and I don't think a point has even been made. Short answer is gaming is in a strange place now. It's bigger and more available than ever before. You can play Fortnite and soon RuneScape on mobile phones. You can take Skyrim and Doom portably. More people are playing than ever before. Developers are doing amazing things and technology is constantly evolving. But we as gamers need to make sure to hold companies accountable for their bullshit. Haha, I'm looking at you, EA. At the same time though, we need to realize not everything will be perfect, and I think patience can be a real virtue in these situations. It's okay for a game to be delayed or even a little broken, as long as that developer puts the time and effort in to correct those mistakes for the betterment of the game and not their wallets.